Oh boy, it's time to talk about Mushoku Tensei again. So I talked about this already on my channel when I first discovered Mushoku Tensei, the anime, and I watched it and I binged it and I was like, holy shit, this anime is amazing. And I discovered that there was actually controversy around the show and I had to talk about it, right? And now season 3 has started airing, so we're up to episode 5 with the subs, and I think the show continues to be like fucking absolutely peak. Right now, we're very much in the calm before the storm. It's so calm. It's so good. Things are way too up. You know shit's gonna go down super hard, right? It's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be a huge disaster, right? I'm looking forward to it with much anticipation. But the show's always been controversial, and I've wanted to talk about the show again, partially just to sing its praises for how good it is, and to talk about some aspects of it again to sort of challenge some typical criticisms of it, especially now in season 3. But just as I was just doing some Google searching, I don't even remember what I was doing. I happened to see a Reddit thread where people were asking, "Is the show overhated?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course it is, right?" And then people were like, "No, actually, it's overrated, right? It's not that good. It's trash." And of course, the comments are people saying, XYZ, all this bullshit. And it's the same kind of delusional trash that I talked about in my last video that you should definitely watch if you haven't, where I went through just like a myriad of criticisms that people have for the show. Mostly just making shit up, honestly. At this point, people who don't like the show and levy criticisms against it are genuinely delusional because the things that they say are just not true. So as before, I need to put a couple things out here. So first of all, when I'm talking about the show, I am talking about the fucking anime. I'm aware that there's a manga and I'm aware that there's a light novel. I haven't read these, right? And so I'm only watching the anime and I'm only referring to the anime. I am aware that a lot has changed. Every episode that comes out of the anime, people are talking about, and you can see YouTube videos talking about how much is cut. And actually, I'm aware now, in retrospect, that a lot of people don't even like season 2 that much. A lot of fans don't like season 2 that much because they think so much content was cut from season 2. So there's been a lot of significant changes. And so if you wanted to have a conversation about the manga or the light novel of Mushoku Tensei, I think that that's maybe a valid different conversation. But what I don't like and what I think is not valid is to take things that only exist in the light novel or the manga and then to apply that to the anime and to use it as criticisms against the anime, especially when those facts either don't exist at all because they've never come up, or if they directly contradict all the evidence and all the things that we have represented in the anime. And then on top of that, people will not even take from the official sources. They won't even take from the canon, even if it's a different canon. They'll take from Word of God. They'll go to like Twitter or wherever the author is at, and they'll take things that the author has said and they will apply that as criticisms toward the show. And I think that that is even less of a valid way to engage with media. In my opinion, the only way to engage, on a legitimate terms with media is with the media itself. And as far as I can tell, as an anime, Mushoku Tensei is genuinely one of the best fucking anime that is out right now. It is certainly like the best isekai. I will hear no challenge to this. And it is definitely one of the best anime in general. And so I want to talk about some of the reasons why I think that this is, sort of working my way back a little bit from season 3. So this is not going to be particularly helpful to anyone who hasn't already watched the show, to be honest with you. I'm mostly singing the praises of, I'm singing to the choir a little bit here. But the reintroduction of Eris here, immediately, the show, I think, appeals, it knows its audience so well. The very first shot of episode 1 of season 3, I recognized immediately. I was like, holy shit. Are we back at the end of season 1 when Eris left at that time, right after Rudy and Eris slept together? And immediately I was proven correct. That is exactly where we do. I knew immediately from that shot that's where we were. And then we pick up and seeing her journey going from that moment to how she ends up as a student of the Sword God, right? And then we spend the next 2 episodes with Eris, which I understand was like an entire side quest or side story that sort of happened alongside Rudy's story in the light novels, right? We get that all sort of condensed here, and I'm sure that there's more to come in the coming episodes. And I thought that this was some incredible content, right? Like, first of all, not having Eris been around for an entire season, she's just gone. and having her reappear, having really not changed at all, it's great. And how far she goes with how aggressive she is, to the point where she, beats the shit out of this girl who, not that she tried to cheat, but her classmate tried to help her cheat in the sword fight, to the point that she pisses herself. And then you come to find out that this was actually the sword god's daughter, and he just sort of sat there and watched, this random animalistic girl beat the shit, or rather the piss out of his own daughter. And he just sat there and be like, well, yeah, she kind of had it coming. She was slacking a little bit, right? That's hilarious, right? And then there's sort of a parallel to be drawn there with how, Rudy sort of let the same thing happen to Eris, because Eris was kind of like this herself when she was younger. She was kind of a bitch. And so he staged that whole kidnapping that went wrong. And as a result of that, Eris changed as a person, right? But that wasn't enough for Nina. She actually needed to spend more years watching Eris devote herself to this training and hear her talking about this guy that Eris was so impressed with and wanted to become like and to stand, shoulder to shoulder with. And then she needed to go and to find out who this guy was. And we get to follow Nina's journey of what, trying to find out more about Rudius and seeing what he was up to. And so we get to go back to season 2 now. And immediately, again, I was like, wait a minute, don't tell me that she was there when the fucking demon god, Bonnie Gotti, showed up. And again, immediately, I was like, holy shit, she was here. And then I went back and I rewatched season 2, and fucking sure enough, there she was. Nina was in season 2, and I didn't know. I wasn't in on the joke back then, but now I am. And it's fucking hilarious that they set that up ahead of time, right? And then after she does that, and after she sees Eris continue to train, we just see her one night join Eris in her sword training, and then we jump cut, and they're kind of like best friends. We don't even need to explain it. It took her longer, it took her more steps, but she kind of went on the same journey that Eris did eventually, right? I think that that's super cool. And I think Nina is a good microcosm of the show's strength in general, is that it can present to you a character who is initially like kind of unlikable. In her case, she's like, a cheating, arrogant, selfish brat and bitch. And in the course of like an episode and a half, right, or 2 episodes, you're immediately like, actually, I kind of like you, right? At least for me, I feel like I was on board with her. I followed her, I was introduced to her. I was like, not great. I don't like this girl. You follow her journey, and then you're kind of on board with her, right? And I feel like the show does this for everybody. And it's easy to do it in this show because, again, the show's strength is that everybody in this world is ultimately a flawed character. Like, it's easy to forgive a character who is flawed or who makes these mistakes or who is, mean or a bitch or anything like that, because everyone in the show is kind of like that to an extent, right? So, and especially when the journey parallels another characters that we've already seen, you almost expect it, even if not consciously, you can sort of see it coming, right? And so it's easy to be on board with that. And now, even though we've only known Nina for 2 episodes, I like her. She's a cool character. I'm looking forward to seeing what more we get to do with her. And I'm glad that Eris has, a friend at this sword academy, right? Even though it seems like maybe the only friend Eris has made in 5 years of being there. And I think it also speaks to, the strength and the tightness of the writing and the plotting and the pacing of these shows, is that even though these are only like 25-minute episodes, I feel like so much is delivered in a single episode. Like in just 2 episodes, so much actually happens with Eris at this academy, of her showing up, us being introduced to the sword god, being introduced to these students, her beginning her training, her fight, having these sparring sessions, and then being introduced to the North god, and then being introduced to the Water god, and then the Water god student joining in on Nina and Eris's training, and then them becoming friends, and them having like a unique journey and a unique interaction. I thought it was all so interesting. So much stuff was packed in. And again, even that girl that we only got a little bit of time with, kind of a cool character. And she also was introduced as like, oh, she's, a cocky, arrogant bitch. And she does back it up initially when she speed blitzes Eris, but then she gets speed blitzed by Nina, and they form this interesting triangle. And then they're actually able to share some interesting insight into why they're able to sort of speed blitz each other, but not necessarily in the reverse direction, right? I thought that was all really interesting, good writing, and it makes sense how they would be able to help each other develop as sword fighters, right? I thought that was really cool. I also thought it was a funny gag that Eris, literally, I wasn't sure if they were going to acknowledge this, but Eris literally, doesn't wash or shower or, clean her gi at all for, weeks or months or days or whatever. And eventually, like, Nina's like, hey, look, if you want to not be, if you don't want to be, you know, emanating animosity, if you don't want to come off as so hostile, maybe go take a bath, okay? And so this is where I want to transition into talking about and challenging maybe a common criticism of the show. Is it, I feel like so many people hyperfixate on parts of the show that don't really exist, right? People talk about this show being like perverted or Rudy as a character being perverted. But like the reality of the show is that this is honestly one of the most sexless shows you can find. Not even just talking about anime, but like all shows in general. Like almost any other show, especially any other anime, I mean, even any other video game. You talk about a fucking Persona game, you talk about any other harem anime, any other non-harem anime, you talk about fucking Game of Thrones. Any other show would have taken the opportunity where Eris was told to go take a bath. They would have taken the time to give you at least a brief scene of Eris in the bath for the smallest amount of fan service, right? Any other show would have done this. But Mushoku Tensei doesn't do this. Not necessarily because I think they're prude, although I'm starting to think maybe they are, honestly. But genuinely because I think they have so much other shit to do. We have so much plot. We have so much character development. We just don't have time for that shit. And this is a consistent through line. Like, for as much as, like, sex and perversion is a theme in this world and in this show, and as many perverted characters as there are, and as many times as we sort of talk about these situations, we never see them. Unless maybe it's with Annalise as a joke or something, right? But we never see this stuff, you know? It's always even just the moment in like episode 3 or 4 when Rudy gets to have a threesome with his 2 wives. We'll get to it, right? You would think that after building that up for a whole episode, or even just the fact that this is a fucking harem anime, there would be even the briefest suggestion of what actually happens there. But no, we just cut to the next day. And we don't even fucking talk about it afterwards, right? So I don't understand why some people hyperfixate on the parts of this show that don't exist, that frankly have not ever existed at all. And the parts that even have existed have been slowly weeded out over time as a result of Rudy's character development as a person and just the nature of the show having more important shit to do and focus on. So I just don't really understand this. And I saw some people leaving comments saying, well, I thought most of the episode was fine. You know, most of episode 3 was fine. But then at the end of the episode, he gets back to worshiping his teacher's panties. And then it went downhill from there. Look, man, I don't understand how this bothers people. It's a funny gag. Like, I really don't understand how this bothers people. It's a funny joke. It's a harmless, funny joke. And the fact that the very next episode, Aisha uses this against him is even funnier, right? And this is the other thing, is that these funny gags are not just funny gags. They're literally character relevant, plot relevant things. Like, Rudy losing that was important to his character for a while, right? And the fact that he has it back now is now important to the family dynamic because his little sister can blackmail him with it, right? I find this funny. And again, it's like the most harmless shit in the world. But for some reason, people hyperfixate on this as if it is somehow like this most grievous offense. And what I don't get is this crazy double standard that people have for supposedly, you know, morally gray characters and morally gray shows and media, and also for different forms of entertainment. Like, you know, how is it that Baldur's Gate 3 became like the most popular video game ever, right? And it particularly blew up and became popular for the memes and the jokes and the fact that you could literally engage in bestiality, right? You could have sex with a bear. And I know he's a druid, and so maybe technically, right? Maybe technically it's not bestiality. But like, at that point, you're getting awfully close to engaging in the same kind of conversations people have about Mushoku Tensei and what technically is and is not different types of perversion, right? That seems awfully familiar, but because that's a Western product, right? Because that's like a popular video game from a well-known studio, and because it became mainstream and because it became popular, everybody's down with it. Everybody's on board with it. And probably because it was a male druid and a bear. If it was a female druid, maybe it would have been a different conversation, right? I find these double standards interesting. And I find it interesting that you can have a character like Dexter, who's literally a serial killer, right? Who literally has killed hundreds of people. But nobody cares. nobody really cares. And even including, people like to forget this, but Dexter has killed a handful of people who really did not deserve it, right? People will let that go and let that slide because for some reason, violence, even mass violence in media, really doesn't bother us. And we're actually getting to a point where it doesn't even necessarily bother us in real life, right? That's a whole different conversation. But we're okay with that. Dexter's okay because Dexter doesn't engage in anything that makes most people feel personally uncomfortable. So you think about some of the most popular, quote unquote, morally gray characters or like anti-heroes or anti-villains in the world. You think about Darth Vader, you think about the Punisher, you think about any of these characters who are super popular, super mainstream, and who people really get behind, but who routinely are known to engage in actively or to have to engaged in the past, horrific acts of mass violence up to and including genocide, right? And people are okay with it. They're like, well, they'll come up with any number of excuses for why it doesn't matter. But, God forbid, Rudius Grey Rat, who is just, by all intents and purposes, for the last 30 years of his life in this fantasy world, has been nothing but an upstanding citizen. God forbid, right? He do anything slightly north of vanilla sexuality or anything like that, right? And suddenly everybody's up in arms and we gotta make a big deal about it. I find that an odd double standard, right? It's really fucking weird to me, the way that people choose to engage with these things. People say they want morally gray. They say they want complex. But they only want it as soon as, up until their personal line. And everybody's personal moral line seems to be murder, right? You can do as much murder as you want. And that is almost literally our threshold for moral gray, right? That defines a hero. Have you or have you not engaged in murder? Do you or do you not believe in killing, right? That's basically how we define heroes, okay? Anything outside of that makes people way too uncomfortable. Even if, within the media, it's literally portrayed at all times as completely harmless and literally as a joke that even in some cases will backfire against the protagonist in ways that move the plot forward or at least are just, meant to be comedic or lighthearted, right? Meanwhile, the protagonist engages in nothing but the most wholesome and or heroic behavior. The last 3 episodes have been nothing but Rudy being the best big brother / adoptive or whatever you'd call him, father figure that he could possibly be for this family that he has inherited, right? But people will just inherently criticize him because I think even a lot of people would even just criticize the fact that he has 2 wives, forgetting that this is a harem anime. That's the genre that it is. It's a harem anime. It's just a grounded, realistic take on a harem anime. Okay, and 2, the fact that monogamy is not some kind of God ordained, although I'm sure some people would argue that it is, and perhaps almost literally monogamy is God ordained. Some kind of divine mandate for the world, right? It is not just the way things must be. I don't know why people hold up monogamy as this sacred beacon of how the world must operate, even though we're literally living in the worst sort of times possible for relationships, proving that maybe the way we think about relationships right now is not optimal. The way we think about gender relationships is not optimal right now. But and yet again, I think a lot of people would criticize the show simply for having a relationship that is not monogamous and trying to portray it in a positive light, which, by the way, it is doing. It is not portraying this in any kind of negative light where the wives are catfighting like you even would see in a typical harem anime where they're not even wives. They're just female friends all fighting for the attention of the male protagonist who supposedly is interested but also doesn't seem to actually have a penis, right? It's really weird that this show it can have so many strong positive female characters like Eris. I would argue Roxy and Sylviette are also strong female characters, right? It can have so many strong female characters. It can present these characters in a positive light, even in these relationships. It can have interesting, flawed characters in bad situations who make bad decisions, like fucking Paul Grey Rat, right? But give him the complexity to make bad decisions, but then make good on those decisions, to make up for those decisions, to keep moving forward despite making those bad decisions, right? I rewatched the scene, the couple of episodes where Rudy reunites with his dad after the Mana disaster, okay? And genuinely, that's some of the best shit in the whole show. Paul had been thinking that his whole family was dead or lost to him forever, and so he's just spiraled out of control completely. He's in the darkest depths of his life. And Rudy comes back, and Rudy genuinely had made some mistakes. Like, he probably could have thought about some other options here for what to do, but he just didn't. And so he tries to just be strong for his dad and be like, hey, well, we made it through. It wasn't that bad. And Paul's like, you son of a bitch. You were just out here fucking hanging around on vacation with your girlfriend, right? And so they get into a fight, right? But then the way that they resolve this, right? They both acknowledge, like, they had both made mistakes, prior to this. They both made mistakes in that conversation, right? In that argument. And they resolve it like fucking mature adults, and they move forward, right? And their relationship is repaired. Like, I mean, I cannot think of a more positive depiction of a father and son dynamic or relationship. And even before that, their relationship had been nothing but like a positive representation of father-son relationship, where Paul had been learning things from Rudy. He had been proud of his son, but then there were moments where Paul got too big of a head, right? And he tried to overstep and put Rudy in his place as the father, and then he realized he made a mistake. He felt bad about it, right? But then there were times where Paul actually did need to sort of put his foot down on certain situations, like, sending Rudy out to tutor Eris instead of letting him stay with Sylviette, right? Things like that. I feel like the show has so many positive depictions of so many different people and situations, just as character moments and as story beats. I just can't understand how people manage to fixate on, again, things that don't even exist in the show and aren't even relevant. And even if they were, haven't happened in this show canonically to the characters in over 30 years. And we come back to, we can forgive you for doing genocide, but we really can't forgive you for being a pervert, That's a line we can't. It doesn't matter how much good you've done in the last 30 years after literally giving your life to save random people you didn't know. We just really can't let the things you did 40 years ago pass, right? It really is interesting to me, the lines in the sand that people will draw on this. And again, the things people will invent or come up with in their own heads in order to not enjoy the show. Meanwhile, a lot of these same people will be like, yeah, but ReZero's peak. When ReZero is literally just torture porn. Like, don't try to pull one over on me. I know what you're doing. You cannot sit here and talk to me about ReZero, or you can't talk to me about Mushoku Tensei being XYZ, and then genuinely try to tell me that all of the gruesome graphic torture porn in ReZero is all just for the sake of character development. Get the fuck out of here, because this show has all the character development and none of the torture porn, okay? And I've literally had this conversation with people online where they try to compare, Rudy and what is his name, fucking Subaru or whatever, right? I don't think there's any comparison, right? I don't understand this. But, like I said, I've heard that the show makes a lot of changes. And from what I've gathered, it seems like the show in general tones down a lot of characters in general. So not just Rudy was a lot more perverted in the light novels, but even a character like Ariel was apparently a lot more perverted and a lot darker of a character in the light novel. But even here, she's still kind of a pervert and she's still kind of a dark character. And again, I think even as kind of a minor supporting character, she's a really interesting character because she's introduced as almost kind of, again, a kind of an unlikable character. When Sylviette initially is, crash landed into her palace, she kind of does manipulate Sylphie into her service, and I'm like, oh, holy shit, I don't really like where this is going. I don't know if I like this person. And then, kind of like the next episode, she clearly has some ulterior motives that she later plays off as a joke. But I think that if Sylphie was down for it, it wouldn't have been a joke, right? But then she owns up to it the next episode, and she's like, yeah, I really did kind of take advantage of you. I manipulated you into, thinking you didn't really have a choice here. I feel bad about that. Sorry about that. Can we be friends? And again, a case of presenting a character in a really bad light initially, and then having them, own up to it or make a correction and actually making you like them more. I was like, oh shit, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you acknowledged that, right? And I think, again, good writing, good character work, and I became a fan of Ariel afterward. And it also meant that I could trust this character, because I think that this, especially because I've since watched Overlord, right? and I think Overlord's a good comparison for this show that I kind of have talked about. I recorded a video talking about this and another character in another show, actually, but that's a whole bigger topic. But especially comparing, this show to Overlord and a princess character in that show, if they hadn't done that with that initial kind of darkness and then admitting of like, hey, I fucked up, sorry about that, I'm not sure I ever would have trusted her, right? Because I would have never been sure if she had ulterior motives. But them doing that up front let me trust this character a lot more, right? And then later, when she and her, her bodyguard Luke help Sylphie try to get with Rudy, or even just reveal her identity to Rudy, genuinely some of the funniest shit in the show. And then there's a moment where Sylphie actually out freaks Ariel. Some of the funniest shit in the show, honestly. So I actually really do want to talk about, this show and Overlord and that other show. But, I feel like I really do need to save that for its own dedicated video. But I already recorded it once, and I never got around to uploading it because I think it could have been a lot better. But I really want to get to that because I think it's such an interesting discussion on people's double standards for what they find acceptable in shows and different types of media across different, Western media and Eastern media, and what kind of crimes they find acceptable or what they will and will not forgive a character for, and how much criticism they levy against fictional characters in general, right? And how unwilling people are to engage with fiction, because it's all just fucking fiction. Like, who fucking cares? It's fiction. Is it a good story? Is it not a good story? I just find it interesting how much baggage people bring to this stuff and how much people want to take this shit seriously, like in a bad, dramatic way that only serves to bring it down while not critically engaging with any of the positive aspects of a show. And I have similar thoughts just in general about like female representation in anime and video games, for instance. Like the amount of good I think that anime and video games have done for female representation in creating, some of the most iconic, strong female characters in the world, it is incredible, right? But games and anime never get credit for this because all anyone ever talks about is, fan service this or over sexualization this, right? It drives me up a fucking wall. As I really just it's a matter of people picking and choosing what parts they want to engage with, and really media reflects what you want to see. If you come into something only wanting to get out of it, negativity and badness, then that's what you're going to get. But if you're willing to engage with stuff and to find the good, assuming there is good, and there usually is, you can get that out of it. And I think that there's a lot of good to get out of Mushoku Tensei. So for all the people who genuinely just don't like the show or can't get past whatever bullshit hangups they have, I find that upsetting. At the same time, I think at this point, it's a lot of grifting. It's a lot of grifting. It's a lot of, like AI bot comments or whatever. Just people engagement farming, because the show is so popular, it's bound to have haters. And I'm curious, if like ReZero has the exact same thing just on the opposite side, and if, there's a ReZero fan out there who feels the exact opposite way that I do about fucking Mushoku Tensei.